Hello and welcome to the World Soccer Talk podcast, your weekly dose of talking about watching soccer on TV, online and apps. Coming up on episode 29, we discuss what lessons MLS can learn from Liga MX's continued success in the US, which MLS game this past weekend had the best viewing number for the 2017 season thus far, our thoughts on Fox's FA Cup final coverage, plus plenty of feedback from you, the listeners, about what changes NBC should consider to improve its EPL coverage next season. My name is Christopher Harris, aka The Gaffer, and I'm joined today by Kartik Krishnaiyer. Kartik, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks, Chris.
Surviving this Florida heat. It's summer. Well, summer arrived like over a month ago, but it's a hot time of the year. But plenty of soccer on deck. So let's start off by talking about what you've been watching this past week.
Yeah, I've been watching a big dose of the U20 World Cup on FS1 and FS2. Very good coverage, I think, for Fox. Obviously, they're picking up the FIFA feed and then doing voiceovers for certain games with or voiceovers with their own commentators. The one drawback, I would say, in their coverage has been their rotation of commentators. So, for example, this morning for the U.S. game, we're taping on Thursday morning, Eastern Standard U.S. time. So Thursday afternoon in Korea, Thursday morning in the United States, they had Mark Followell and Tony Meola, who I thought were excellent. They did a very good job with this U.S. 6, New Zealand 0 game. However, it was their first U.S. game, and then there had been different commentators. We've heard from Brian Dunseth. We talked about him last week. We've heard from Glenn Davis. We've heard from a whole host of people calling U.S. games. And it's been the same thing with the Mexico games. There's been rotations of announcers, and that's a little bit annoying. But I'm glad that they're bringing us every game. They're bringing us every game on FS1 or FS2. They've done a really good job, I think, of promoting this tournament as compared to the way ESPN, when they had the FIFA contract, would promote youth tournaments. So I give Fox a passing grade for this. And I'm thinking maybe the rotation of commentators, Chris, has to do with feeling out which combinations work, which teams work, who's comfortable with whom for Confederations Cup, and then obviously more importantly next summer for the World Cup. And I think we maybe will see some experimentation during Confederations Cup and Gold Cup as well, and the U17 World Cup, which is coming up in a few months from India. That's another dry run for Russia 2018 and the France 2019 Women's World Cup. I think they want to have everything down before those two tournaments, because the scattergun approach to me must have a logical conclusion.
Absolutely, I think it's one of those things. This not this past season's Europa League final that just ended with United winning it, but the previous Europa League, there was a lot of experimentation on Thursday broadcast because the level of teams playing in the tournament, I guess a couple of seasons ago now too, wasn't the greatest. You didn't have the Uniteds and of that ilk in the tournament, so you had a lot of experimentation. You had Brian McBride doing a lot of the broadcasts. You had a whole bunch of people that you usually didn't hear. Ross Fletcher was one that was introduced, and slowly but surely they've been picking up more airtime or have moved on to other broadcasters. I think with the FIFA Confederations Cup, I don't think they'll do too much experimentation for that one. I think that's going to be more of a dry run for the World Cup, so they'll probably want to put the best foot forward. But I think it's more so probably the Gold Cup in terms of the early rounds. And also for next season too. I mean, having the Tony Meolas of the world and Mark Followells and so on and so forth, just trying to see, okay, in terms of coverage, if Fox begins to get more coverage or wants to do more American voices for their commentaries rather than the world feed, who would be a best fit for those types of games?
Followell, keep in mind, is only available during the NBA offseason. So or when the Dallas Mavericks aren't playing. So that's been part of maybe the inability to integrate him during non-summer events.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and his broadcast style is very, very American. I mean, it's old school kind of. It does sound to me. I mean, he knows soccer, but it does sound like it's old school sports kind of job.
Yeah, it's a total contrast from John Strong. If you're used to John Strong, this is why I found those comments the other week on Alexi Lawless's podcast so odd, because to me, John Strong's commentary style is, if you just ignore the accent, I think it's very kind of anglicized, his commentary style. Yeah. Maybe even more so than some of the British commentators, whereas a guy like Followill is a classic American sports announcer.
Yeah, I would say John Strong is more anglicized than Arlo White, who is English.
Yeah, right. I know. I would agree with that.
All right. So what else, Kartik? I know the U20 World Cup. I know you've been watching a bunch of that. But what other great games have we watched?
So obviously the FA Cup final, we can get to kind of breaking that down in a few minutes. But watch that on Fox. And obviously any conversation in the studio, I guess, is going to always come down to Arsene Wenger. And Wenger has managed to make himself the center of attention and the center of conversation throughout English football. We'll get back to that in a few minutes. NPSL Sunshine Conference game, which I called between Naples and Boca Raton on Saturday night. I hope people enjoyed my commentary of that game if they watched it. NWSL, Chicago Red Stars and Carolina Courage. This was a fantastic game between two of the top teams in the league. Chicago was able to win the game. It was an exciting game. It was an open game. The usual complaints I have about Go 90, I still have. They're getting slightly better week to week, but not quickly enough. The championship final, which was on BN here in the United States, was the fourth network appearance for Stuart Robson, and also the fourth network appearance for John Champion, which he pointed out to me on Twitter when I said he's made 3 and 4 for Robson in the last month on U.S. networks. Champion very adroitly pointed out that he had been on the Sci-Fi Network the final day of the Premier League season, which I had forgotten. Right, the Chelsea game, which was kind of an afterthought that day, other than the JT. His sub off in the 26th minute in the Guard of Honor and all of that. So that was the fourth network for Champion, fourth network for Robson. Two of the best in the business, two of my favorites. Obviously, two people I ranked in the top 5, top 3 of their respective categories when we did our commentator rankings. And Chris, let me tell you, we needed those two badly for this match because if it hadn't been John Champion and Stuart Robson, I probably would have eventually turned the game off. I mean, their commentary, and Champion has a lot of experience with this because he has done a lot of solo commentaries on championship games and League Cup matches, and the type of matches which are slower and where he needs to fill in kind of the co-commentator role also. So he kind of understood how to narrate through 120 minutes of that. Reading not really even attempting to play, Huddersfield playing for the first 30 minutes or so and then running out of steam, it seems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I watched, we talked about this last week too. I wasn't impressed with either Huddersfield or Reading. I'm really happy that Huddersfield made it through. There's a unique angle in terms of David Wagner for next season. It's going to add a storyline for especially American viewers. But
and a Yorkshire team, which I think is important for the league. Exactly,
and plus being the first time that they've made it to the Premier League. So a lot of different angles there. There's going to be an exciting team to watch. They've got a great stadium, and it is Yorkshire, like you said, which adds a different dynamic to the league and different type of fans and a lot of history. But that's what I love about John Champion too. He's always adds a historical perspective. Oftentimes in his intros to the matches. So for this one, he was talking about how this started off in the 80s as a fad, and now it's turned into the biggest football match, or the richest football match in the world, talking about the playoff structure and how it was introduced in the 80s in the championship, which wasn't even called the championship back then, basically the second tier to try to get promotion to the Premier League. And his historical context, I guess, is what I really love about it, as well as his commentating style. But it was one of those kind of just really kind of painful matches to watch, but with so much on the line. And I wasn't surprised because Huddersfield wasn't scoring many goals, even in the semi-finals. but they held on. Pre-match, there was the analysis from Gary Bailey and Thomas Rongen. Kay Murray is on vacation in Europe, so it was interesting to see actually Gary Bailey sit in as the host, and I thought he did a great job. I mean, he's reading the teleprompters, but the interaction between Gary Bailey and Thomas Rongen, kind of just the two of them, I thought was fine. And hats off to for beIN Sports too, for showing the and playing the national anthem from Wembley and showing that uncut before the match started.
Yeah, they did a very good job, I thought, beIN. They have the last few years with this championship final. It has been Kay Murray hosting the previous few years. A match that was exciting was the Liga MX final, the second leg on Sunday night, although there was some questionable officiating and play acting towards the end of the game. I thought Univision was outstanding with the game. I was a little surprised that the kickoff time was at 7 Eastern. I thought it would be an 8 or 9 o'clock Eastern just to build the hype. And in Mexico, we tend to have a lot of late kickoffs, but this game was at the MetLife state or whatever it's called,
OmniLife,
the stadium,
right?
OmniLife, sorry, in Guadalajara, the Chivas Stadium, which Vergara had built, and it was a great spectacle. And Chivas, we know that they drive ratings, we know that they drive interest in the United States, and boy, this was a great spectacle. Gignac did not get a goal in this game, which was, I think, very surprising for a lot of folks, and that was the difference. He had a lot of chances, some opportunities that he probably in other circumstances would have finished. And so Tigres was looking for their third title in the last four tournaments, since Gignac came over from Liga. They didn't get it, but obviously they've made the final three of the four tournaments now, and the thing that I found very interesting about the coverage of this was that there wasn't as much buildup. And I think, again, it was the 7 o'clock start time. As much buildup from Univision, although there were on their bumper programs during the day, there wasn't as much of a lead-in pregame show as you typically have for these. We've had for these Liga MX playoff games throughout the this Clausura season or even previous tournaments. So that I thought was interesting, but that was because of the odd timing of the game, 7:07 or 7:08 kickoff, right, something like that.
How about that goal from Alan Pulido? I don't know if you saw that, Kartik.
It was just that was
right into the corner.
Amazing.
Yeah,
the Pulido goal. And there's literally no defense for that. There's no way to defend that.
Yeah. Unstoppable.
Space. Right, and then the crowd from that point forward in that match was just amazing. And so here's a critique. Now, this is getting off our little media thing, but it does translate to television. There had been a lot of fear when Chivas moved into that stadium that there would be no atmosphere and it would be static. And this is something we talk about all over the world because it's a much bigger facility than the old Estadio Jalisco. The acoustics are different. I think it became much like Jalisco did after that Pulido goal. For the duration of the match, you could feel the energy coming through your television sets, and this might be seen as the night that ground, that stadium, grew up and became a proper ground. And we've seen that with facilities in England as teams have gotten into bigger facilities. I can tell you, this is a Man City supporter. I didn't feel like we had really moved into Eastlands, or the Etihad as it's now called, from Main Road until we had a Europa League game against Hamburg, which we ended up losing in 2008. But I thought, okay, or 2009. I can't remember. I think it was 2009. Thought, okay, finally, this stadium is befitting of our old ground. It finally has that energy and that life. And I think that this was that game for OmniLife Stadium.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it makes a big difference on television too. When you do have, whether it's the extremes, kind of a West Ham stadium, the Olympic Stadium, where there's not much of an energy level there. The atmosphere is not that good, and it doesn't help with the TV broadcast. Vice versa on the other side, on the other extreme too. When you do have an electric atmosphere in a stadium with the crowd cheering and just kind of the energy levels high, it makes you want to continue watching. So it does make a big difference. And that was one of the things I noticed too with the U20 games. I was watching the US New Zealand this morning. Just there was more empty seats than there were people there. It just doesn't help in terms of kind of pulling you into that broadcast. Yeah,
the only game I've watched in the tournament that has had a good crowd was South Korea and England, and England actually beat them, beat the host country. But that was there was was a good crowd for that because it was the home country. But that's always the problem in youth tournaments that are held in these kind of far-flung locations. I mean, I think India will be even worse for the U17s.
I was blown away, though, Kartik, by this Chivas Tigres final, the second leg. Reason being is that I was at Disney. My daughter was playing in one of the soccer tournaments there. So by the time her game was over, I came back to the hotel, and that was the first thing I did was switch on the Liga MX game, the final, and it just ended. And the first thing I saw was one of the players chasing another player across the pitch to try to, I don't know, hit him or kick him or whatever it was, and then all the post-match celebrations and with the trophy and everything else. But it felt like watching like a World Cup final. It was like the confetti. I mean, the fans going crazy, the players just so emotional. It was a great television production, or great soccer to watch in terms of, and I missed the game. I saw the highlights afterwards, but just the energy level was just at a fever high for post-match. It was a great thing to watch. And of course it was in Spanish on Univision, so I couldn't even understand what they were saying, but I enjoyed it as a neutral.
Liga MX is such a television-driven league. It's something that we sometimes forget, and it's a league where I think television and the impact of television has been partly because they drive some of the clubs. Right, a number of the clubs are owned by television companies. Has just been accepted as by the Mexican fan base in a way that, for example, all the changes for television have not been accepted in England and Germany, right? Yeah. By fans. You still hear so many complaints about it from German fans. Well, why are there games on Sunday at X hour? I mean, all the games should kick off at the same time, and the same thing in England. That I think that they know how to play the television even more than English fans do.
Yep. Yeah,
the confetti was coming down during the game, by the way, too.
Oh, really?
Right?
Wow.
Yeah. Which stuff was coming onto the pitch, which is something that people don't like about Mexican football.
I like it. I mean, to me, it reminds me of 1978 World Cup final, Argentina against Holland, and I think from Buenos Aires, but also other World Cup finals too. And just I like the confetti because it adds a whole different dynamic. It just sometimes it makes it hard to see the pitch lines. I mean, if it is too much confetti, but personally, I enjoy it. It's a great television spectacle. So, Kartik, the FA Cup final, I did get a chance to watch the pre-match on Fox, and then I was at the hotel, and then I watched, I think, the game itself at the restaurant in the hotel. The game I thought was entertaining. I was surprised how Arsenal did so well and how poor Chelsea was at times. But in the pre-match, I was really glad to see Mario Melchiot getting a run out there instead of Alexi Lalas. Lalas was doing the Portland against Seattle later. I thought Mario Melchiot's English is a lot better than it was when he first started doing broadcast for Fox. And I also liked Winalda being in Lalas's chair, adding more analysis and more kind of thoughtful input than Lalas, who, I don't know, just doesn't seem to be that interested in English soccer, doesn't have anything really interesting to say, to me at least. And kind of pre-match, the main theme that they were talking about was that how the shine is back in the FA Cup, and that was something they repeated quite a few times. I think it's debatable in terms of, I mean, the final was a great spectacle. It wasn't the greatest match ever, but that was fine. It was competitive. But it was an interesting kind of theme that they were kind of just repeating throughout the pre-match, just to try to add some gravitas perhaps to the match itself. And also hats off to Fox too for showing no commercials interruptions for Abide With Me, which is the pre-FA Cup song that they always sing, as well as the national anthem, God Save Our Queen, without breaking away from commercials.
Yeah, I thought they were interpreting the revival of the FA Cup, Malchiot and Warren Barton, as a potentially because there were big teams playing in the final and it was seen as a big occasion for big teams. But that's part of the reason why the FA Cup is dying, in my opinion, is that you always hear the very kind of stereotypical knee-jerk reactions from media saying, "Oh, well, it's because the big teams don't take it seriously and they rotate their squad and they're playing B teams through the third and fourth and fifth rounds of the FA Cup." A lot of it has to do with the fact that teams that are fighting relegation from the Premier League and teams that are pushing for promotion from the Championship don't take the FA Cup seriously at all, and they don't have the squad depth to where they can make a run with their B teams or with a heavily rotated squad. So I think you getting arguably the top 4 teams in the country. Obviously, Liverpool finished in the top 4, but you could argue Arsenal are one of the top 4 teams in the country. So you're getting the top 4 teams in the country in the semifinals: Arsenal, Chelsea, Man United, Man City, and Spurs. I think just speaks to the tournament now becoming perhaps utterly predictable as the prize of the league and league survival or promotion is far, far greater than winning the FA Cup. So I had thought in the last few years, maybe you would then see, because of this phenomena, the likes of a Stoke or a Southampton, who are not going to get relegated, but at the same time generally won't qualify for Europe. Well, Southampton's qualified the last few years, so maybe that's a bad example. Maybe they would make a run in the FA Cup and win an FA Cup, but that hasn't happened either. Right. I mean, it's generally been well, the last 4 FA Cup winners are Arsenal 3 times and Man United once. Yep. So it's I think for me, that's hurting the FA Cup and the romanticism around the cup. Now, in order to elevate it again to being an important property for someone like Fox, who's a rights holder, or for media who love this competition, maybe you do need to have Arsenal and Man United win it every year. I don't know.
Yeah, I think in many ways the FA Cup is almost like a bronze medal. I mean, it's you look at Arsenal winning it this season, that saves Wenger's job, so to speak, but also kind of something, a piece of silverware that at least the season wasn't a complete disaster. I mean, they should have done better, I think. But last season too, Man United winning it too, beating Crystal Palace in the final, that was something that was kind of something to brighten up another depressing season for Man United. That so I don't think it's at the level that it has been in the past, and I think in many ways too that when we get to the final, we kind of, I think, romanticize a little bit more, but then some of us forget kind of the third, fourth, and fifth rounds where there are a lot of blowouts. I mean, there was the Spurs against Millwall game, and yes, there were some upsets, but I don't know. It's not at that level of competition that it used to be on the pedestal. Now it's a few tiers down, kind of competing at the same level as a League Cup. And so that was my take. Was kind of I was surprised by how they were kind of positioning the shine is back. Well, what's that based on? Because I'm not seeing the shine. Yes, the final was great, and there's a lot of focus on that. But other than that, I'm not seeing it. The other thing about Fox too, again, another hats off, is that they showed the trophy celebration afterwards. So that's been a big complaint in many years ago now, where they didn't show that at all. So they showed that. So thumbs up there. And then Kartik, so Martin Tyler and Stuart Robson was doing that one on the commentary. I enjoyed that. Following that was the Seattle against Portland game. And this one, I watched the game itself. I didn't. I was at the restaurant bar, so I wasn't able to actually listen in on the Rob Stone and Alexi Lalas analysis or pre-match, what they were talking about. But there was a goal in the first 4 minutes, which should have kept viewers hooked and glued to this game, especially with something happening that quickly. Unfortunately, it was the only goal of the game, but from watching it from a bar, and it was a really physical game. I couldn't believe how overly physical it was. Yes, it's a derby, but Clint Dempsey should have got a red card for an elbow. It was just a very physical game on I'm sure what was a very tough surface in terms of the AstroTurf there. But did you get a chance to see this one, Kartik?
No, this is when I was actually driving to Naples. Okay. I left at the full time of the FA Cup game, and then got to Naples and was calling my game, and then had my mobile device on Go 90 to keep an eye on the NWSL game. So I didn't see any MLS actually on Saturday. Yeah. For whatever reason, for me, priority has become NWSL over MLS when they're competing. I guess crazy as that might sound to some of our listeners.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are doing that though too. It's you're not the only one for sure. The challenge with Seattle against Portland was it was on the same time as the DFB Pokal final between Frankfurt and Dortmund, and also at the same time as the Copa del Rey final between Barcelona and Alaves. So that I'm sure that had an impact in terms of that.
Core soccer fans, and also it ended up being obviously the last match for well, we knew Valverde was probably going to come into Barcelona replacing Luis Enrique, but for Thomas Tuchel, and it's interesting to watch transitioning. I think we've all been watching ESPN FC. Both of us have been watching ESPN FC this week. Tuchelista, that the official Tuchelista is Gab Marcotti. Loves Thomas Tuchel. Mm-hmm. It's been interesting seeing his analysis of what happened and why Tuchel would get the sack or leave by mutual consent at Dortmund, and it's been real interesting just transitioning to ESPN FC this week, which we've both been watching, because the most significant thing to me is that once you start talking about transfers and you're in a European closed season, you have to have Marcotti on every day, and you have to have him in every conversation, because his reporting on transfers and knowledge of what's going on transfer-wise is second to none, and he's one of the few guys who follows all these leagues. So yep. The show has been very good this week. They've been based in Cardiff. On Monday, actually, it was still in Bristol, and it was Brian McBride, Stevie Nicol, and Casey Keller, and Sebastian Salazar. But they spent most of the show talking about Wenger. It felt like now that we've got that conversation out of the way and we know what's happened with Wenger, it's been good to see them on the ground in Cardiff with Moreno, with Marcotti, with Robson, and with Burley. Mm-hmm. And I know I must be forgetting someone in that group. I think obviously Dan Thomas is the host. But interestingly for you, Chris, this must be neat, because they're doing their little sampling of Welsh culture and of the flavor of Cardiff, and that's something nice to see, because so often we get coverage of football in this country that completely obscures the fact that Wales is part of the United Kingdom. And it's about, well, this is where you go in London, this is where you go in Manchester, this is what Liverpool's like. Mm-hmm. And it's really good to see that kind of cultural emphasis on Cardiff. And obviously we're going to get a couple more days of it.
Yeah, it's been a great tourist opportunity here for Wales, for the country of Wales. I'm actually going to be going back there in a couple of weeks on holiday with my family, and we're planning on staying, I think, for the whole 2 weeks in Wales, and just traveling around different castles and different tourist spots and kind of some of the mountains, and just enjoying kind of the country life there in Wales. But from as someone who was born in Wales and grew up in Wales, seeing the ESPN FC crew in Cardiff, kind of on set, outside studio, and just with the backdrop of Cardiff Castle or the different buildings around there. That's great to see. That was something I noticed too last week when I was in England, going into Paddington Station in London, and the entire Paddington Station was filled with these huge posters that you see in tube stations usually on the walls, like 10 foot tall. All of them were focused on Cardiff, not only as a tourist spot and Wales as a tourist spot, but also a place to do business in. And Paddington is the main railway station, train station that services Wales. So a lot of the trains, all the football fans that will be coming to this match, probably from Madrid and Juventus, will probably fly into London and then take the train from Paddington to Cardiff. It's only about 2 hours away by train. But yeah, it's great to see. And actually, the funny thing, well, it's not really funny, but the ESPN has a better representation, have more people in Cardiff, in Wales, and they don't have the rights than Fox does. I mean, Fox is sending John Strong and Brad Friedel, and I think Kate Abdo is going to be there. Jeff Shreves is going to be there too, doing some sideline reporting, but he would have been there anyway for Sky Sports. Meanwhile, like you said too, I mean, ESPN has a crew of probably about 6 or 7 people, talents that are there.
Yeah, and they've done this previous years with the show too. I mean, this is shows a commitment. And again, I mean, we went through this in the 2015 Women's World Cup, where ESPN's coverage, bumper coverage of an event that was on Fox, was better on ESPN. And they had been able to keep some of the talent like Julie Foudy at the network to analyze. But this is not unprecedented, and it's something that I think Fox has to be concerned about, just because of the head-to-head comparison. Now, they hate when we make the head-to-head comparison, right? Yep. They hate when we take a look at what ESPN is doing for the Euros going on simultaneously as Fox for the Copa America, and make the contrast. But there's no question here that when you look at what ESPN FC is doing, they're committed to covering soccer at a high level in a news fashion, in a news and commentary fashion, regardless of what network games are on. Now, they show highlights from all over, except when BN doesn't give them bumper rights. Mm-hmm. But it again shows Fox what they could be capable of doing in terms of bumper programming and news programming and auxiliary programming, if they were ancillary programming, if they were willing to make the effort and hire the talent and put forth the ideas.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, because I mean, Fox, I'm not sure when they're flying in the talent, if they're flying them in, say, today, Thursday, to try to get John Strong and Brad Friedel at some of the pre-match press conferences, and see if they can actually kind of talk to some of the players and coaches and get some insight that will help them in their broadcast for Saturday's game. We'll get more into that in the next segment, but in terms of what Fox is planning on doing. But at the same time, I mean, ESPN's been there all week. With Fox, I mean, it's a missed opportunity. I mean, we probably won't know anything about their analysis or any of their coverage until 2:00 on Saturday when they start broadcasting. As far as I know, I haven't seen any of it, unless I've missed it. There's been no build-up in terms of, here's a live report from Kate Abdo and talking about arriving in Wales and kind of what the atmosphere is like in the days building up to the game, so on and so forth. But it's a complete different mindset with Fox, and I don't think you're going for Saturday. I don't think you're going to get any kind of insights about Welsh culture, or what Wales means, what this means to Wales, which is a big deal to have this Champions League final. People from around the world watching this on Fox. I don't think you'll get any of that. It'll be just kind of
I would think same old. For you personally and other people of Welsh heritage, this is a proud moment to have the Champions League final in your capital city, and it's a showcase for Wales, and that showcase is not being reflected on American, or at least with the American rights holder for UEFA. As we know now. Maybe Saturday they surprise us, but I'm not expecting it. So for those of you who want a taste of Welsh culture and build up for this match, just watch ESPN FC the rest of the week, and you'll get it. It's also, I think, very interesting to note that ESPN is continuing to send this sort of talent over and make this commitment even after their budget cuts, because I said earlier that they have been doing this the last few years around the Champions League final. Dan Thomas will be there the week of, and Alejandro Moreno, and then there's a rotating cast of characters that joins them. Burley comes, obviously, and then this year it's Robson and Marcotti. In past years you've had Sid Lowe there and others, Honningstein there, but I think that it shows that there's still a commitment to soccer, or at least to presenting soccer in a newsy way from that network, even while they cut back in other sports and don't have many soccer rights.
And it's also a really good opportunity for ESPN FC, you know what I mean? Because I just stumbled across it last night. I wasn't planning on watching it, so I stumbled across that ESPN FC was there, and I switched it on, and then they were live from Cardiff, and I'm like, wow, this is incredible. This is, I didn't expect that. So, for me as a sports fan, I'm probably more likely to try to tune into ESPN FC for the rest of the week and then continue to kind of watch the programming. I usually don't watch ESPN FC just because of, I'm usually busy at that time of the day. Maybe I should be watching it more, which is exactly what ESPN's trying to do, is just to pull in more people to watch ESPN FC, and it's filling a void, a black hole where there is no coverage really day to day of soccer except for ESPN FC. So probably those of us who are like me, who haven't been watching ESPN FC that much, maybe we should. So Kartik,
yeah, and I guess for me, I should just point this out. I don't listen to as many podcasts or watch as many games as other people do. I don't watch as many games as you do, but I watch ESPN FC 6 times a week. So I feel like I'm up to speed on everything. Yep. It's just this is not a promotion for ESPN, but I'm just saying it is kind of a shortcut or cheat sheet because they do such a good job with their presentation and covering everything.
It's also something that NBC doesn't do too. So anyway, and we'll get into that a little bit later too.
Right. I made that comparison in a couple weeks ago where I said, hey, for me, a lot of times I'm waiting till ESPN FC's studio show comes on Sunday night, and I get Shaka and I get Craig Burley and whoever else. Craig Burley's never on Sundays, but Shaka and Steve Nicol on Sundays to analyze the Premier League games, because sometimes NBC, because of their programming commitments, are cutting out, and we don't have Goal Zone, or we have this abbreviated Goal Zone. So, they're doing things that even NBC's not doing.
So before I move on to the next segment, those two games I mentioned before, the Frankfurt against Dortmund final and the Barca against Alaves, both were brilliant games to watch, which is a challenge for MLS in terms of having their game at the same time, or roughly the same time. The Barca game, not surprisingly, but another sensational performance by Messi. Just some incredible dribbling and passing in that one, just over the top. And the Frankfurt against Dortmund game, that one I watched on ESPN FC, actually not ESPN 3, sorry, with Spanish language commentary. And I'm not sure who the commentators were on this one. They were broadcasting it in Spanish language, but the level of commentating was fantastic. It just added to the energy and passion. I really enjoyed both of those games. So I was kind of flipping back and forth before I watched, I think, most of the second half of the Seattle. Actually, I was flipping back and forth between all three at times. So I'd like to give a shout out to our sponsor who makes this podcast possible, and that's SeatGeek. Buying tickets to sports and concerts can be complicated, but there is a better, simpler way to buy, and that's with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to live events. With SeatGeek's seamless mobile experience, you can buy and sell tickets in just 2 taps. SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, fully guaranteed. There's nothing quite like seeing your favorite team or musician in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone, and it's by far the easiest way I've found to shop for tickets. I can be anywhere, and just with a couple of taps, I can instantly find seats. I actually just used SeatGeek, the app, this past week to look for tickets again to Swansea's friendlies coming up against Philadelphia Union, North Carolina FC, and Richmond Kickers. Now, SeatGeek is designed to make your ticket buying experience easier than ever. It saves you time and money by searching multiple ticket sites to compare prices and find amazing deals. And to get the most bang for your buck, SeatGeek grades every ticket based on value to help you immediately identify the best seats that fit your budget. Plus, every purchase is fully guaranteed, so you can shop for tickets on SeatGeek with confidence. Now, make SeatGeek your go-to app for finding the best seats and the best deals on every type of ticket, from sports and concerts to comedy and theatre. Best of all, my listeners get $20 off their first SeatGeek purchase. Just download the SeatGeek app and enter promo code WSTPOD today. That's promo code WSTPOD for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. Now, Kartik, let's move on to TV streaming news, and I'll have you kick it off.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I've actually had some conversations, off-the-record conversations related to this particular article this week. So let's spill here. Bloomberg has revealed that Fox and Telemundo bought the 2026 TV rights to the U.S. and Canada markets at the same price as the 2022 issue. And remember, they were no bid rollovers, basically. Telemundo agreed to pay at least $350 million, with FIFA receiving a bonus of US $115 million if the US ended up organizing the event. The amount paid by Fox was $300 million, with the $180 million bonus, assuming again the US hosts the World Cup. World Football could have earned an additional $500 million in competing bids, a FIFA official said, on the grounds that the contracts were not public. Frank Dunn, editor of TV Sports Markets, a research firm on global sports rights, agrees that FIFA has stopped making money. Regardless of the bonus mechanism, they would have had made more money through an open process, says Dunn. Now, what I've been kind of hearing chatter about also is that it may have been, in fact, written into Fox's. I don't know about Telemundo's contract. We can find out about that, but written into Fox's contract for 2018 and 2022, a guarantee of a summer tournament. It wasn't just an assumption. It wasn't just a kind of unspoken assumption, because World Cups are always held in the summer. It may have actually been in their contract, in which case News Corp Fox would have had probably the ability, the justification to take FIFA to court if they wanted to about that. So this is a way of maybe making all parties happy. And there's some other conversations about this beyond that I've been having that I don't want to reveal publicly, but it is a conversation that a lot of folks are having, because they feel like Fox and Telemundo have gotten the deal of the century.
Oh yeah,
basically,
big time
for this, and there has to be some reason. Obviously, Dunn says that Fox has stopped making. That FIFA stopped making money. I agree. Maybe they're so awash in cash and corruption scandals and DOJ and FBI investigations that they want to be careful about this stuff, and they don't want to extort hundreds and hundreds of millions more than they need out of broadcasters, especially in this period of time when broadcast TV rights are beginning to wane, right? And broadcast channels and cable channels are beginning to have problems, at least in the United States. But it seems like there probably were additional motivations for why they would want to keep particularly Fox happy. And that's something I'm sure we'll get into in the future, and don't want to necessarily reveal everything I've heard at this point.
Yeah, definitely. So with Fox, once they did find out that the 2026, I'm sorry, the 2022 World Cup in terms of Qatar was going to be played in the wintertime. You mean December, January, and that goes right into, that's NFL prime time in terms of all the playoffs. It's a terrible deal for Fox, honestly. If they had been on that as self-standing property, that is a terrible time in this country to have the World Cup for television. So I empathize with Fox completely. I want to make that clear. Oh yeah, definitely. So for 2022, once they had won the bid for that, and then they found out later that by the way, it's actually going to be played in December, January. In terms of the amount of revenue, advertising, sponsorship, everything, TV ratings that they've been able to generate for the 2022 World Cup would be severely a lot smaller than a summer World Cup. So that's when Fox's lawyers moved in and pressured FIFA, and then FIFA came back and said, okay, well, for the 2026 World Cup, we'll give it to you at a bargain. We'll give it to you at the same price as the 2022, which is $300 million. And then Fox said, okay, we'll give you a $180 million bonus if this game or this tournament in 2026 would be held in the US. Now, anyone who watched the World Cup in terms of, the race for the head of FIFA in terms of after Blatter left and there was the race for the FIFA president. If you watch the live footage of that on YouTube, you would have seen Sunil Gulati, Don Garber, Sunil especially, working so closely with Infantino, trying to round up the votes, trying to get to make sure that Infantino was going to win this one, which he did, of course. And but now we know why. In terms of the close relationship between the two of them. Yeah,
there's even some speculation that Sunil is directly pulling strings in Zurich now, which is an unprecedented amount of access and power for the United States. Well, maybe not actually, because Chuck Blazer had a lot of influence over Sepp Blatter, but I tend tend to think that it was a more symbiotic relationship. There are people who seem to think that that report on this stuff that haven't necessarily said it publicly, but a lot of speculation that perhaps Galati, that Infantino is subservient to Galati. That and that to me is a little bit surprising. But when you look at the moves FIFA has made in the last year, they all seem to be of some degree of benefit to the United States.
Absolutely. So if Fox if the US does get the World Cup in 2026, which is fantastic news if they do get it with Canada and Mexico, most of the games are going to be played in the United States. Fox would have to pay the $180 million bonus, so they'd be paying $480 million for the 2026 World Cup rights. Now imagine, Kartik, imagine if this had gone into an open bid and say 6 months from now, after it was announced that the US would host the 2026 World Cup, and after it was revealed and confirmed that it's going to be a 48-team World Cup, the biggest World Cup ever, more countries from around the world. Imagine how much ESPN, NBC, beIN Sports, maybe even Turner Sports, or maybe somebody else would bid on the rights for this World Cup. FIFA screwed up big time. In terms of it all comes from the Qatar incident, in terms of having to move the tournament to the winter, which is stupid beyond belief, and then being pressured into having to basically give the 2026 World Cup rights to Fox and Telemundo for a bargain. And now they're at a point where they need the money, they're losing sponsors. And they could have, who knows how much money they could have brought in for this. $480 million still is a bargain for a World Cup in the US. Was it the 250th anniversary of the United States, of the independence? This would be, for the United States, from that perspective, yes, it's going to be probably a more boring World Cup in terms of all the games being played and all the early rounds. But this would be the biggest World Cup ever in the history of the tournament.
Yeah, potentially it will be.
Well, just in terms of size, in terms of
right. Well, yeah.
How well?
So I guess from a television perspective, it probably would be, and you can think about the ability maybe that FIFA would have had to have engaged new broadcasters, maybe even a CBS or somebody else, maybe A&E Networks. We see their interest in soccer now. Discovery Channel, Discovery Networks have made bids, and actually they own Eurosport now. Eurosport, so they show a lot of soccer on their channels in the UK and in Europe. So I think you're potentially limiting the ability for soccer to grow in this country. And the odd thing also is, I think, and who knows what the media landscape looks like 9 years from now. Mm-hmm. But right now they're on what would be considered second or third tier, I don't want to say tier, but second or third choice networks in Fox and in Telemundo, instead of being on ESPN and Univision or NBC and Univision. So ESPN and Univision, I think, would be the preferred pairing, and that's what we've had for previous FIFA tournaments. Now we've got this Fox Telemundo pairing, which is it doesn't have the cachet. Mm-hmm. And with the World Cup in the United States with 48 teams, you would potentially be able to get ESPN and Univision, or you'd force Fox and Telemundo to defend their property and spend a lot more money to defend their property. That all having been said, I don't know about Telemundo and contracts, but I do have it from pretty good sources that Fox had been promised the Summer World Cup, and it's a disaster for them. I think for Telemundo, it's less of a disaster also because the Spanish language, there tends to be gravitation towards soccer anyway, regardless of what else is on in the sports landscape. But I think for Fox, it's a complete disaster to have a World Cup right in the middle of NFL season and college bowls and college championships, college football, the heart of the NBA season and the NHL. So NHL doesn't matter to them, but college basketball season as well. So really one of the busiest times on the sports calendar. They are probably owed this, quite frankly. Oh, yeah. But it's, again, FIFA's mistake because of Qatar.
Exactly.
It all goes back to that.
Yeah. Imagine for the 2022 World Cup in terms of how many of those matches will be on Fox Sports 2. We'd have to look at the time zones and what the time the kickoff matches are. The matches kick off.
I tend to think that they will probably try and make the commitment to get as many games on Fox Sports 1 as possible.
For sure.
Difficult for them. Between the Big Ten championship and the Pac-10 championship and all the NFL they have and the college bowls they have and their college basketball conference commitments to the Big East to get games on over-the-air Fox. That's going to be interesting because we already know that they've made a commitment to show more games over-the-air on Fox this go-around in 2018 than ABC's been showing the last several World Cups. So they're going to take a step back in 2022. That's not their fault.
Yeah.
It's the fault of FIFA.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it had come up for open bid and ESPN was able to bid on the 2026 rights, as well as NBC or Turner or others, that FIFA probably could have gotten probably $1 billion for the rights to that World Cup. So basically, what's that? An extra $500 million. So yeah, FIFA really, really screwed up on this one, and it's to Fox's gain. I don't blame Fox at all, but I just it is interesting in terms of some of this information that's coming out from Bloomberg. So thanks for making the listeners and myself aware of that, Kartik. So let's move on. Now, if you've ever wanted to get an Amazon Fire TV stick, DirecTV Now is offering a free one to new subscribers who sign up and prepay for 1 month of streaming service. DirecTV Now is completely separate than DirecTV, the satellite company. It's a separate service. It's a streaming service that you can use if you want to be a cord cutter and cancel your cable or satellite and sign up for DirecTV Now. You can do that. It has all the NBC, ESPN, and Fox channels, and pricing is about $34.99 a month. It starts at the value of an Amazon Fire TV stick is $40. So if you prepay for 1 month, you get 1 month of DirecTV Now, and you also get the actual Fire TV stick, which comes with the voice remote. To get the free stick, it's a special offer for listeners to World Soccer Talk. So go to worldsoccertalk.com and you'll see an article there that has more information about how you can sign up for that. So just click on the link from there. In related news, DirecTV Now has launched an app on Roku devices too. So if you have a Roku, you can access DirecTV Now through there. Kartik, so we talked about it before in terms of Fox's coverage for this weekend, but maybe a refresher in terms of what they're planning for this weekend.
Yeah, so they're going to have Kate Abdo on site in Cardiff. John Strong and Brad Friedel will call the match live from Cardiff, which is great. And obviously, Brad Friedel has played in that stadium before, won the League Cup with Blackburn in 2003 or 2004. I think it was 2004 maybe. Jeff Shreves, who normally is with Sky, whose voice you hear all the time on post-game on NBC. If you're not familiar with him, will be reporting from the sidelines for Sky's sister network, Fox. Rod Studio will be in the broadcast center in LA alongside Lawless, Winalda, and Barton. That is the familiar pairing, the familiar Champions League combo, where I think that studio team has gotten better. Lawless is very hit or miss, although I think one thing about having Lawless and Barton in studio is really good for a Juventus game because they both do dissect defending and the art of defending, and Lawless loves Italian defensive football anyway. They dissect Juventus. I've noticed that throughout this entire tournament. They've been very listenable to when they're talking about Juventus and the way that back three operates and the way they close down space and when they pick their opportunities to go forward. In a way that they're not really very, very sharp in analyzing other top teams in Europe. Give kind of your lazy normal analysis, stereotypical analysis, whereas you rely on Winalda for the cutting edge analysis on the other teams, which you probably will be relying on Winalda for the cutting edge analysis on Real Madrid in this game. But that's Fox's lineup for the weekend.
Yep, and for Spanish language, this game will be live also on Fox Deportes. Now, Kartik, moving on to TV ratings, what's the big one for this past week?
Yeah, the big game, obviously, was Univision, what we talked about, 2.8 million for Chivas Tigres, in spite of that kind of odd start time, 7 p.m. Eastern, although it doesn't seem to have affected the number. 2.8 million for the second leg on the different carriers, Univision over the air and Deportes, etc. So that's a fantastic number. And you also had a huge number for the Mexico-Croatia game the previous night on Univision Deportes. There was a small number on FS1, a game that was kind of quite frankly, a comical game in terms of how poorly Mexico played, even though they began to turn it on in the last 5 minutes. But Croatia, I DVR'd this game. I was in Naples, but came back and watched it, and I thought Croatia were really good value for that result. I probably should have won by more.
Yeah, to put the Chivas Tigres number into context, so 2.8 million. The last year's UEFA Champions League final was, I believe, 1.4 or 1.8 million. But whatever it is, if it's 1.8 million, I could find the number later, but 1.8 million, I believe it was. And that's, I mean, a million more watched the Chivas against Tigres second leg. The first leg, I believe, was about 1.2, 1.3 million too. So just massive numbers for Liga MX in the US. It's really incredible.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note also that you're seeing anything that comes up before or after, particularly after Liga MX games or Mexican national team games, do well on Univision. And so that applies to the MLS ratings this weekend for the game that was on Univision.
Yeah. So that one was San Jose against LA Galaxy, and that one had 894,000. That was on Saturday and on Univision and Univision Deportes, and that was from 10 o'clock until midnight Eastern time, so 7 p.m. Pacific. Yeah, big numbers there. And actually, that's the biggest number for MLS this season. It's not as big as what that same game last June. That one had 1 million. And some of the comments on the website too, in terms of this number, there was some disappointment just because they said, okay, this is probably MLS's best chance to have a game that's on Saturday night, prime time for Pacific Coast, when there's no Liga MX game on that night. To have a big number. So to me, it's a big number. I mean, especially with TV ratings across all sports really going down. 894,000, basically 900,000 is nothing to sniff at. That's a big number. And I think MLS, all being said, is probably pretty happy with that number. Now, Kartik, so FA Cup final was on earlier that day. That was Arsenal against Chelsea. On Fox and Fox Deportes. How many viewers were in it for that match?
Yeah, just under 1 million. It was down 17% from last year's Crystal Palace Manchester United final, 984,000, and that was then reflected by the dip in the Seattle-Portland game last season after the FA Cup final. I believe it was New York City and Orlando, it was
New York against the Red Bulls.
The Red Bulls, that's right. It was that 7-1 game, 7-0 game. Yep. But it was down from 20% from last year for that game, the Seattle-Portland game, which was 498,000. Now, of course, I've had a long-standing narrative that I've talked about that Seattle-Portland Cascadia games will draw better on national television than New York derbies. I guess in this case I was proven wrong because down 20% from last year. But it's a similar dip to the FA Cup final, so it seems like the correlation is just the numbers were higher last year. Again, Manchester United was in the FA Cup final last year, so let's not forget that. That might have accounted for part of it. Atlanta versus New York City FC, Chris, that did 346,000 on ESPN on Sunday. That's by this season standard a pretty decent number for MLS. Now, here's the thing. They keep rotating the same teams. Atlanta, NYCFC, Red Bull, Orlando, Minnesota we're getting a lot of, and then
Galaxy.
Not even Seattle, Portland, right? Mm-hmm. We're getting a lot. So that's it on ESPN. They're not really rotating other teams. When other teams come into the mix, the ratings kind of tank. We saw that on FS1 in the game that followed, FC Dallas and Houston only had 140,000 viewers. And this is a situation, again, where I think ESPN, not ESPN, MLS had kept the same broadcast windows the previous 2 years on ESPN and Fox. When they go back into those windows, as they did this weekend and as they did 2 weekends ago, sometimes we see a lag in ratings because people aren't quite sure if there actually is an MLS game on at that time. Mm-hmm. And then the final number from the weekend, the Rain Dash game, which was 4 to 6 p.m. on Lifetime up against the Seattle-Portland game, did a rating that had only 94,000 viewers on Lifetime. A few weeks ago, when there was a MLS game on FS1, not on over-the-air Fox, but on FS1, Orlando and New York City, and there was a NWSL game on Lifetime, they got identical numbers. This week, because the MLS game was on over-the-air Fox, we saw a big gap in the numbers. So I don't know if that's instructive. It's only 2 data points, but that's worth noting.
Yeah, there was a lot of debate actually yesterday, I think, on Twitter, on the World Soccer Talk account there too, from several different people talking about MLS TV ratings and looking at the San Jose number and the Atlanta number and all the numbers we talked about just a couple of seconds ago. The feedback was concern, but then I was talking about that and I said, well, don't forget that the MLS TV rights are combined with U.S. soccer TV rights. So there is a lot of, as long as the U.S. soccer team is doing well, and there's a lot of interest in the national team, which there always is, not as much as there have been, but I'm sure things will pick up once they get to hopefully qualify for the World Cup. But I think in many ways, I think MLS is lucky to have, their rights mixed in with the US soccer. So when ESPN, Univision, Fox and others are looking to, the next rights cycle, so what's that, 2021 onwards, probably going through till the 2026 World Cup, especially if it's hosted in North America. They're probably looking at, okay, here's another cash cow opportunity for the U.S. national team. So in order to get the U.S. national team rights, we also have to get MLS rights. And they're intermingled in terms of if MLS does well, then hopefully that'll help the U.S. national team or vice versa. If the national team does well, that should help MLS TV ratings. We haven't seen that yet in terms of any big bump from MLS numbers, historically speaking, from the last couple of years. But that's the thinking, and actually MLS is very fortunate to have a safety pillow, basically, that for future rights negotiations when the U.S. national team is really the one that's carrying the weight. All right, Kartik, so let's move on to listener mailbag, and we got a ton of feedback from last week's podcast, which was the one that we talked about what NBC should consider to improve EPL coverage next season. The first one comes from Anthony Bello, and he sent this in through email. He says, "Hi guys, I listened to a podcast on improving NBC Premier League coverage, and before we fire Arlo White or add midweek programming, how about we start off with these issues? Number one, getting Premier League extra time on every cable provider. My provider, which is Hotwire, who I have been fighting with for 3 years to carry extra time, doesn't. And I also believe that Fios doesn't carry extra time along with Dish. But not having Premier League extra time sucks for me because I would love to DVR and binge Premier League games on Saturdays. Also, not having extra time is bad during the midweek matches because you don't have a real sense of what's going on in the league when you're only getting one match a day. So we'll go point by point. That one is the same with me too. I have Comcast, which is owned by the same company that owns NBC, and I don't have Premier League extra time either. For me, most of the matches I watch are actually on NBC Sports Live Extra, or actually NBC Sports app. And watch it through there, or especially if there's a few games going on at the same time, I'll have one on the laptop and then watch a game on the television, or one on an iPad, watching 3 at a time. But how about you, Kartik? Do you have Premier League extra time?
I do, and I've had it from the get-go between Uverse and DirecTV. Yeah.
All right, but it's a good point, Anthony. Yeah, it's been 3 years, and still is an issue. And I think in hindsight, probably NBC Sports probably looks at Premier League Extra Time and thinks of it as it was a good idea, but it's not working in terms of distribution. There are providers that are not making it available. Number 2, Anthony says, sometimes matches aren't archived on the NBC website. I was out one day for a Palace Middlesbrough match, and I figured that I could archive it later. I go on the website. It was the only match not available. So this is something I hear about all the time, weekly, and it's not NBC's fault. So the Premier League, in their requirements, which is so archaic, don't allow NBC or other broadcasters that have the rights to the Premier League around the world to have every single match available on archive. So they can only have, I think it's 8 of the 10 or 9 of the 10 matches available. So then NBC has to decide, okay, which of these 10 matches, which 1 or 2 we're going to have to pull and not have on the website. It's silly, it's stupid, but it's the Premier League. And probably from the Premier League's point of view, they're probably thinking piracy, but it's ridiculous. All right, number 3, Anthony says, NBC is the one network that doesn't let you watch multiple matches on the same screen. He says, come on, NBC, I'm sure people would love to be able to watch 4 Premier League matches at the same time on their laptops. And I agree. I mean, Fox Sports Go has the multi-screen option. ESPN3 has Mosaic. And beIN Sports, I don't think, has it. But then DirecTV has their option for when they have games, I believe, where you can have a bunch of different games on the same screen, so on and so forth. So great points by Anthony. And he adds, finally, he says, let's start with making sure every Premier League fan has access to state-of-the-art technology for every match before we ask for other stuff. So, yeah, good thoughts there. Anything to add on that one, Kartik?
No, I think that's there's a lot there. I've been frustrated also by the kind of the archive hit or miss randomization, and just learned something from you, which is that there are still some limits because of the archaic way the Premier League manages media.
Exactly. Next comment is from Gene, and he or she posted this one on YouTube, and he or she says, the only change I think NBC needs to make is to have more of their own announcers out there, and that's basically it. So, and actually, NBC's been doing this quite a bit, probably from the start of games, when they did the first year, where we would just have Ola White doing, I think it was like 1 game a weekend, it seemed. But then we've had, slowly but surely, I mean, Steve Bauer doing some, and then I think it seems to be, unless I'm forgetting things, but it seems to be that Ola White's, doing an average of about 3 games a weekend now, which is more than what he started off at. Next comment is from all the next comments are from worldsoccertalk.com, from the website, from the comments section on this podcast, last week's podcast. First one is from Oliver Say, and he says, some parts of the Premier League on NBC presentation, notably post-match goal zone, are not working and need to be tweaked. And this is one, Kartik, that you've talked about with goal zone.
Yeah, I made that case a couple of weeks ago on this show, and I'm glad to see that Oliver and some others agree with me.
Next up is Cliff, and he says, NBC needs more EPL shows to fill the downtime for most Sundays through the following Saturdays. Trying to draw a new audience with just 2 game days won't work. Why not pick up a nightly Sky, BBC, or Premier League talk show such as Premier League News, team news updates, rather than trying to squeeze all the news of the week into a 30 to 60 minute pre-game show on Saturday and Sunday. Thoughts, Kartik?
Yeah, I think I agree with Cliff. I think part of what they've been able to do with the pregame shows, though, is give it a purpose by having it almost as a news show and a catch-up on news and events that are unrelated to the game that they're about to show, and sell a lot of commercials, which they can't sell during the games because of that. So they made it a newsy program in a way that unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your perspective, you're forced to watch it because Neil Ashton's going to come on a Monday and give you some news, or there's going to be some analysis from Musto and Martino and Earl of the week's events that you weren't able to get. Now, of course, we've talked about ESPN FC so much on this show, I might as well say it again. I would have already, because I watch ESPN FC every night, would have already gotten Craig Burley and Shaka Hislop and Brian McBride and whoever else talking about this very news. But for NBC viewers, exclusive NBC viewers, and we know the numbers aren't very high for ESPN FC, so for the bulk of their audience, it might be new material.
Yeah, and Premier League, the Premier League news show, I think is available on NBCSports.com each day, but it takes a while to get uploaded. And
they show it pretty randomly on NBCSN, but you never know when it's going to be on, and it's just filler when they show it.
Exactly. The actual show, I like it a lot. It's improved a lot over the years, and the level of production is great, and Georgie Bingham, I think, is on there. There's a whole bunch of people on there that are actually some good analysis and good news. Next comment is from Anthony Powell, and he says, a lot of the decline in ratings is out of NBC's control, but more of the marquee games seem to be on Mondays or early Sundays now, which limit viewership. The Saturday 12:30 game in the US has also seemed to decline in importance. I'd like to see more studio programming for Premier League on Friday. And I completely agree, Kartik. I mean, it used to be that the Saturday 12:30 kickoff was usually a big match. Of course, the Sunday 11 o'clock Eastern time was always the big one, the bigger of the one, and the Saturday 7:45, what it used to be, now 7:30, used to be kind of, I wouldn't say throwaway, but kind of the third most interesting game from the weekend. But it seems that the Saturday early morning ones have often been more important, or they've been pushing them a lot to Sunday with, I guess, European teams playing in Europe, so they give them an extra day rest and have them play on a Sunday. But yeah, good points there by Anthony. I agree. And then last but not least, Edward Chu, and he posted this one on Twitter on our account. He says, NBC needs to use more of USA and CNBC to broadcast their sports inventory. And I think what he's talking about too is that for some of these overflow matches. So I mean, yes, it's great to have them on NBCSN, but when there's other matches going on, it'd be wonderful to use, especially USA. USA's numbers have been better than CNBC.
Yeah, I think that's the issue, though. Actually, is that USA's numbers are too high, and you're actually going to bring them down if you're showing a secondary Premier League game. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I mean, it's one of the highest rated cable networks on television, and sports ratings are going down. Now on CNBC, I completely agree, and NBC has, through the various times in the last 2 decades, and we saw it this season, right? There was a Premier League game on CNBC every weekend, at least one. In some cases, multiple games. They have used CNBC to kind of dump some of their sports inventory because it's a business network, and they've tried to find a niche for CNBC over the weekends. They used to have these talk shows that they would run that were kind of separate from all of CNBC's weekday programming, which is a more business-oriented, maybe caters for more investor-based audience. That didn't work. They then went to putting sports programming on CNBC. That didn't work. They went to doing reruns and reruns of news programs and reruns of other things. It didn't work.
Infomercials. I mean, sometimes
infomercials, right? And now they're swinging back, at least in the case of the NHL and Premier League, to showing sports on the weekends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely some good comments. And actually, we appreciate all comments from listeners. If you have any feedback, comments on what we've said, or questions about anything that you've been wondering in terms of the soccer media industry, or why you're not able to watch or be able to watch whatever game it is on whatever device you're looking to watch it on, let us know. You can send comments, feedback, questions to us by email, and that's web@worldsoccertalk.com. Twitter is WSoccerTalk, and then Facebook is facebook.com/WorldSoccerTalk. Now, moving on to our last segment of the show, and that's our featured topic of the week, and that is what Major League Soccer can learn from Liga MX. Now, Kartik, let me have you kick it off in terms of some of the things you've seen from Liga MX that they've been doing well, that perhaps MLS could consider adding to improve TV ratings in the US.
Yeah, I think the television production and the way the presentation is done on Univision in particular, but also on the other networks that cover Liga MX, Azteca America, and ESPN Deportes and Telemundo lends itself, and I mentioned earlier that it's a very TV-oriented league, lends itself to engaging viewers who may not even understand the context of a match or even understand the language in many cases to watching Liga MX. I think that there's an importance in regular season matches because of the split season. And this is something we tried when I was at NASL. It hasn't necessarily worked for NASL, probably because the league is just so dire in its level of play. But in general, the NASL is. But we did try the split season. They still have a split season in the NASL, spring and fall, and it makes every game that much more important. Regular season game when you have an Apertura and Clausura, it's a quick regular season and it's a long playoff tournament. But that makes the regular season in both the Apertura and Clausura, every match, so important for clubs in Mexico. There are personality-driven coaches. You don't have that in Major League Soccer, with the possible exception of Caleb Porter and the way he acts. You've had the likes of Miguel Herrera, who just left Zolos, left Tijuana. You have guys like Ferretti, who obviously we saw with Tigres over the weekend. For years and years and years, there have been colorful coaches. You think about the likes of Ricardo Lavolpe, Hugo Sanchez, etc. Colorful, aggressive, fun coaches. And we know now from watching the Premier League, coaches drive so much of the narrative, right? So I think the coaches are important. Now, the level of play is good, but I think it's ultimately overrated as a factor in determining market audience, because the viewership numbers for Liga MX are significantly higher. Now, again, the carrier and access is better, but are significantly higher than when you have Barcelona and Real Madrid games on accessible channels in the United States. Now, it's not always higher, but generally it's markedly higher. If you're talking about level of play, Barcelona and Real Madrid, their level of play, or Bayern Munich, much higher than Liga MX.
Yeah, the coaching kind of idea, kind of answer there is a good one. Because if you think back to, think about matches from the 80s or 90s, watching any of those games, so little of the actual TV camera footage was on the coach. You probably would have the cameras following the ball as we went around the pitch and stuff like that. It's rarely that you'd actually have them focus or zoom in on the actual manager or coach. And that's something too with Major League Soccer. Like you said, with Caleb Porter pretty much being the only one that's really kind of whether it's you love him or you hate him type of figure as far as a coach, it does add a different dimension to the game. You look at maybe any of the leagues from around the world, there's so much of a focus on the coach, and that does have a big impact in terms of whether you, again, love him or hate him, it's going to pull people in to watch it and to complain about the coach and how much of an egomaniac he is, if it's Mourinho or what a marvel he is in terms of the strategy and tactical side of things. So it does make a difference. And I think overall, too, in terms of, like you were saying with Barcelona and Real Madrid, the level of play is much higher. But for whatever reason, watching games on Univision, it seems that the television production value, the quality of the pictures, the audio, the sound levels, whether they're bumping up the sound of the crowd, which I don't think they are, because most of the stadiums are filled. Seats, tickets to seats at Liga MX games are cheap. I think one of the most cost-effective leagues in the world in terms of seeing top-level football. So for the television viewing audience, it creates a great atmosphere. And like you said, Kartik, even if you don't understand the language, it's a really absorbing league to watch. And actually it's a league I would like to watch more of. I've been kind of almost like programmed where I've been so used to getting up early to watch matches and then watching kind of the midday match and then watching mid-afternoon in the past, I would usually watch either Serie A or La Liga, but these days it could be that watching a little bit of that, but then also watching MLS or going back and watching maybe some Bundesliga. So I'm pre-programmed to be kind of just from habit, watching most of my matches earlier in the day up until mid-afternoon, and then evenings, taking a break and watching other things. So I'd like to watch Liga MX more, and I think it's a really exciting league to watch. And any other thoughts about some of the other ideas that what MLS can learn?
Yeah, I think MLS can learn that you don't manufacture rivalries. The manufacturing of MLS rivalries now is becoming more and more a topic of conversation, because they've given these names. Like, you have names, the battle for the Seminole War canoe we used to have here in college football in the state of Florida, when Florida and Miami would play more regularly, and the battle for Paul Bunyan's axe and things like that in the Big Ten. They have fallen into that pattern of Trillion Cup and this and that, and a Heritage Cup, etc. And people are seeing it as quite inauthentic. Let rivalries grow, let rivalries be natural, and also learn from Liga MX that if you overhype certain aspects, you're losing a part of the audience, because I think what a lot of people in MLS don't realize is that fans have become much more sophisticated about this sport and how they consume the sport and how they view this sport. And if you continue to force narratives down their throat like it's 2000 or 2002 or 2005, before this sport was much more mainstream and much more mainstream in the way we thought about this sport in this country, then you're going to continue to fail. So they have a lot they can learn from Liga MX. They have a lot they can learn, period.
Yeah, and going back to what you said about the playoff system too, I mean, that's my big one, that probably limits the amount of time I watch MLS, in terms of especially from March all the way through till July, when most of those games really don't matter because 54% of the teams qualify for the playoffs. So what's the fun or the incentive to watch those games in the heat of the summer until later in the summer when it does when it is more meaningful? And with that split system, like you said, Kartik, having the Apertura and Clausura, I think for MLS, that was definitely something that they should consider, in having a shorter season and then having the games being more meaningful in terms of trying to get into the playoffs for whether it's the Apertura or Clausura, rather than having to wait 6 months to find out, okay, which of those teams actually qualify, make it through to the next round. That's my biggest lesson I think that MLS could learn from Liga MX, is just restructuring the season in a way that's going to maximize TV viewership. And that's to me the biggest challenge that they have. It's not there are many factors. Relegation, promotion, is a factor that turns people off. I think there's some other things, but that's the root of the problem, I think, in terms of why MLS is struggling. And also they have a lot of competition too. I mean, Liga MX is a tough competitive league to come up against. And as we've seen with the growing Hispanic population in the United States, Liga MX is ideally positioned. I mean, it's already the most popular league in the United States by far, but that should just continue to grow.
Yeah, no, I think it will continue to grow as time goes on.
Anything else, Kartik? Any other? What about the level of play in Liga MX? Anything? Any lessons to be learned there?
No, I think the level of play argument with MLS, I get it from a lot of people, but there are factors that create the level of play problems in MLS, like travel and the time of the year they're playing. Now, of course, MLS could solve that by being by splitting the league into conferences and not have teams play until the playoffs. But they're so sweaty on manufacturing rivalries between LA teams and New York teams and these transcontinental matchups that they'll never do that. And also shifting the calendar, which I think is something that has been logical for years and years and years. But they seem unwilling to do. And anytime I bring the subject up, and this is partly from the context of being in the Southeast, having worked at the second division league and had countless games postponed or delayed because of weather over the summer when it's hot, humid, and there are thunderstorms, that affects the level of play. The humidity and heat, and it's hot throughout most of the United States in the summer, affects the level of play. You factor in the travel. I think there's a lot of reasons why MLS, in spite of having much better youth and development academies, we're seeing that with how well the U.S. is performing in the U20 tournament, how good they've been in this tournament. The vast majority of those players coming out of MLS academies, and signing bigger name foreign players, and also scouting better in Latin America and getting a lot of good players out of Argentina and Colombia and other places, quality players. You would think that the overall level of play in MLS would have increased because the skill level, the technical level, the level of just everything, even management, even level of training has gotten better. But the level of play is never going to be satisfactory to the people who are snobbish about it because of these other factors. So I think it's difficult to really improve the level of play in MLS without moving the calendar, honestly. But what we learned from Liga MX is if you're creative in how you set up your tournament and you make games more relevant, the level of play may not matter as much. Because let me tell you something, Liga MX is probably the slowest league on American television in terms of just the pace of the games. Much slower than MLS, in fact.
I think that makes sense, though, in terms of having the slower level of play. Actually, in comparison to MLS, maybe not, but in terms of just playing in the heat. I mean, a lot of these games are early afternoon or mid-afternoon games or going into the evenings. But just from this past weekend,
right, that's true.
Being in Orlando at this Disney tournament, even as a spectator on the sidelines, it was so hot. It felt like walking into an oven. The temperatures were approaching 100 degrees, but with the humidity, it felt a lot hotter. And my daughter was playing. I was thinking to myself, "Oh my gosh!" Just standing on the sidelines, even drinking water and just trying to cool down. I just can't imagine how difficult it must be playing a full game on a pitch. So in terms of the slower playing style, I completely understand. It's very taxing on the players. I do think that MLS should look at the calendar and try to see if there's a way to adapt it slightly, because I know that people up north are probably saying like, Chris and Kartik, you're crazy because summertime's perfect to play MLS games in. But in the South, it isn't. In the South, it's the worst time of the year in terms of the thunderstorms and the weather. I really think there should be a northern-southern league rather than a east-west conference, and just play to the times of the year, which winter time in Florida is ideal. It's the perfect place to be in the world in terms of great temperatures and great weather.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually, the north-south split. And so maybe that's what you do. I mean, the east-west split just makes sense from a time zone perspective. Yeah. But yeah, maybe that's how you have to do it.
But you could have a manufactured rivalry with the North against the South. It's the Civil War.
Right, right. I do think the league has to be split, though. That's my
It's a long season. It is a long season.
It's a long season, and it's a big country or continent, and you have to split. You have to split things up. I mean, the idea of having a national league in this country, I think, is a bit ridiculous. And there's a reason why even in the Russian Premier League, the teams are all in one part of the country. It's very, very difficult, and it's something that American sports people don't quite get. And this is, again, the disconnect. It's not just about pro-rel. Mm-hmm. A lot of it is about pro-rel, the disconnect between American sports people reared in an American sports culture and those of us who are football, soccer people. But I think it's things like this, regionalization, rivalries, traveling fans. It's all these things that I think when you play, when your calendar is, that people who defend MLS from an American sporting perspective don't quite get.
Mm-hmm. And we're about halfway through this MLS season. Imagine if you did you're entering, if you had an Apertura Clausura and you're entering the playoffs now to go ahead and try to figure out who's going to be winning the first half of the season. And in many ways too, in terms of the timing, it's perfect. You'd end the season maybe late May, early June, and then allow the players to go on international duty. And then when they come back from international duty, maybe start up the season. I mean, again, maybe it's in September runs into the whole NFL college football thing again. But anyway, the 4-month calendar for a season kind of splits, like half season for 4 months, half season for another 4 months, whenever they are throughout the year. To me, it makes a lot more sense and it's a lot more exciting rather than just waiting impatiently to see who qualifies for the playoffs. 6 or 7 months after the season begins.
Yeah, I agree on that.
All right, Kartik. So where can listeners find you on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter at KKFLA737.
All right. So thanks for listening. You can get a new episode of the World Soccer Talk podcast every Thursday. Every episode is released on SoundCloud, YouTube, Stitcher, iTunes, Audio Boom, and WorldSoccerTalk.com. And if you like the show, share it with your friends on social media and give us a review. Kartik, Krishnaiyer, over to you.
Enjoy your football.